Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this live stream. Thank you guys so much for joining me. We haven't done a YouTube live stream in a long time, and I thought it was a good opportunity to do so to show you how to use resin. It's very much something that you can get caught up in. You can make a lot of mistakes, and I thought if I can save you some of those mistakes, that's great. Also, there may even be people in the community that can chime in and can interact. I love going on right now in the live stream that when you're looking at it, everybody's saying where they're from. Go ahead and comment and chat. Let us know where you're joining in from on this Saturday morning. So we are going to be talking resin. And if you've never used resin before, you've probably seen, if you're on social media, resin pours and people making things and making dice and making lights and making beautiful tables out of wood slices. There's so many different kinds of resin art that can be made. And I want to show you the small aspect of that, but hopefully it gets your mind churning for how you can go in and create your own resin designs. I'm actually wearing one that is a pendant that was made, and I'll show you the bracelet too that matches, from a Class Garden box. So trash can really be turned into treasure, thinking outside of the box, gathering pictures, gathering materials, using beads, little found mementos. There's all kinds of things that you can encapsulate in resin and really have fun using it to create. So Jennifer said she cannot wait because she's tried a couple times unsuccessfully. I have tried many times to do resin over the years and not been successful. If you watch, Anna and I have a Facebook Live from maybe a year and a half ago, where we also tried unsuccessfully to work with resin. Resin can be a lot of fun, but when you're working in a small area with tiny little bezels, sometimes it can actually be more difficult than working with something that's on a large scale. There's a number of household materials that you may want to have handy, and I'll go over those. And I'll show you everything from how I measure and cut to the pouring of the resin and answer any questions. So when you're looking here, hello to Marissa and Jennifer and Sherry and Cindy and Joyce and Linda. Hello to Ginny in Utah and Kay in South Carolina. Good morning to Ann and to those from, got a couple Californias here. Assateague Island. Gina, welcome from Assateague Island. And hi to Joan in South Jersey. Be there in about 2 weeks down in South Jersey. So lots of people from all over Canada and Turkey and Istanbul and Kentucky. So hello to all of you joining in on this live. If you have questions, make sure to go in and or comment below and ask, because like I said, there may actually be some people in here that are more accomplished when it comes to resin than I am. I'm a novice. I like to play, but I love to see all of the different creations and things that people made. About 2 weeks ago here in Hagerstown, Maryland, USA, we had our second annual bead retreat. So our first annual one was back in the fall of 2023, and we just had one 2024 spring. Our next one will be spring of 2025. And then if you're interested, we have one more spot left to go along with us to the Czech Republic. And that trip is happening in October. And if you would like to join, one spot left. You can go to potomacbeads.com/events and check out any live events or live happenings that we may have. They'll be on that page there. So the best thing about the retreat was getting the opportunity to introduce people to resin and to see their creative minds and juices flow. We had a wonderful time, and it was in the historic Maryland Theater here, which is a theater from the 1900s, beautiful decor, decorations, and we used the playbills from the actual theater to create our jewelry and our designs. That led to a ton of different beautiful pieces of jewelry. If you're not on our email list, so I saw Chris Chris King is here on this post. I actually posted a picture in our email this morning of Chris's design from the retreat. So I have a big setup here just to show you kind of what is all around me and which tools and stuff I have handy. And I'll go over that, but I'm going to pan in and kind of show you what resin is. Some of you have no experience with resin. So we're going to pan in a little bit and we're going to talk resin. So resin is something that is a liquid, the resin that we'll be using, and it turns into a solid with the help of UV or ultraviolet light. There are different kinds of resin. There's 1-part resin and there's 2-part resins. We are going to be using a 1-part resin. I find for very small things, the 1-part resin is very simple and easy to use. 2-part resins involve measuring, pouring, and making sure basically that that chemical combination is accurate, because you do not want a piece of resin that doesn't dry. That becomes sticky, tacky over time, can grab any dust materials that's around it. And if you are not careful when mixing the 2-part resins together, which activate it, then you are not going to get that final hardened, nice domed effect that you want with the resin. Jewelry actually requires very little resin, so you're not using a ton of resin. We have resin in a 1-part, and we kind of wrote all over them. I should have grabbed one that wasn't. We're using a Bead Tech UV resin. This is 50 milliliters, and you'll think, whoa, this bottle is way bigger than 50 millimeters. It is way bigger than 50 millimeters. You don't want your resin bottle to be completely full, because what's going to happen is it's going to flow out more than you want it to, and it's going to cause bubbles, it's going to cause runs. I have some what not to do's here, as well as some success stories. So we're going to show a bunch of different samples and what went wrong and what we did. The 1-part resin is unique because you don't have to do any mixing. You don't have to go in and say, okay, I'm going in and I've got to measure and pour and what milliliters am I working with. 1-part's really easy. And the nice thing is with the 1-part resin, lid on and cap, you can keep it and you can maintain it for a long time. So you can do a couple pieces, come back a couple days later, do a couple more pieces. You don't have to work and worry too much about this. The UV resin here is UV resin because it does cure under a UV light. So if you've been to, here, I'll see if I can get it to go without it being on the surface. So that UV light is going to help to cure the resin. And what curing means is basically harden the resin. So don't overthink it. It's just, how do I get my resin from liquid to solid? UV light. Now, the sun will give off UV light. So if you don't have a light, a UV light specific, you can put it in a sunny window. However, that sometimes causes it to dry at different rates, and then you can get things that are not completely dry, some things that are dry, and you have to go back and forth. If you're going to invest in resin, which with 50 milliliters is about $20, and you can get so many projects. For a group of 45 ladies, plus we had 5 staff that were working with them, we used a fraction of, I think, 6 bottles of the resin, and all the bottles still have a lot left in, just to give you an idea of how many pieces you can make. 20 plus pieces really in one bottle. I can make about 20 so bracelets, even more with this one bottle. So $20 for that is really, really inexpensive when you're looking at it. But you want the resin to sit under the UV because it does then dry at the exact same amount of time. And how much time to let your UV resin dry? There's no magic answer to that. So when we were working with it at the Maryland Theater during the retreat, I had said that the day or the week before when I made it here in the studio, it was raining outside. It was very heavy moisture in the air, even though I was inside of a building. And the temperature was about 70 degrees, which is normal. It took about 5 to 6 minutes to dry and cure under the UV light. We noticed when we were at the Maryland Theater that in about 5 minutes with a thin layer, it was drying. So I always say when you're going in, kind of have a test piece that you're looking at and you're trying to find to see how long you need to put it underneath the light. When it comes to drying the UV with, or the resin with that UV light, the nice thing is that you get no yellowing. That can occur sometimes with the 2-part resin, and it's crystal clear and it's no mixing or measuring. That to me is the best part. I also really like that it's that fast UV light cured resin because I'm not waiting days. The original resin that I used to use years ago, I would sit in the window and I would come back a couple hours later, see if it was done, come back a couple hours, see if it's done. Technology has made the UV lights very inexpensive. You can get them in addition to the UV and have it for years. So when you are looking at designing and creating resin jewelry, you really can use anything. Like I said, this one here is made with Clasp Garden packaging. So I thought these little flowers on the old Clasp Garden packaging were super cute, little dandelions. And I created the piece based on that. And some of the actual pieces that were on the Clasp Garden just used that. You can use pictures, you can use mementos, you can use really anything you've done. If you've done resin before, in the chat, you can say exactly what you've used. That would be amazing because the options really are completely endless when you're working with it. I know Chris said that she had used sprinkles, like cupcake sprinkles when working on it. Anna did a number of her designs during the retreat with some beads in it. Dried flowers, that's a great one, Barbara, as well too. Pictures, I've done, the first resin project I ever did was with hymnals and missalettes from church and did words and fancy lettering. Go to a used bookstore, go in and just find a book that you love the type font of. You can also print it out. One thing that we're going to talk about right away is how do you prepare and how do you get ready for those products when it comes to the resin. So Mod Podge. You can create this. You can pick it up at the dollar store. It doesn't matter. This is Mod Podge Gloss, and it's a water-based glue sealer and finish. This basically is going to be in tiny shells. Joan, great idea as well too. Sea glass, glitter, flowers, clay. Exactly. So many gemstone chips. So many options. I have a couple different options sitting here too that I'll show you. So Mod Podge glue when you're using paper or fabric even. This is really great to be a quick, simple, dry method and to hold in the paint. So I have some examples here. This example is kind of the what not to do. The paper that is in the interior, I did not cover with Mod Podge glue. If you look really carefully, you can see that all of the ink there has gathered down at the base of the design. Keep in mind that when you're using resin, just like water or anything else, and you mix it with color, paper, or anything that's printed, that can run. So that's where you're going in. Japanese origami, that's amazing when you're looking at it too. And napkins, separated layers, it's a great idea. Butterflies, cicada wings. Ooh, if you get the lantern flies kill those invasive creatures, and you get beautiful wings with that. So the easiest thing to start with if you've never done resin before is paper. The reason paper is the easiest is because it's flat. When you go in and start adding things, you can sometimes get bubbles, you can get a little bit of a slope in the design that it's not quite even. So the first thing that I'm going to show you is just how to prepare your paper if you're starting out and you've never done it before. So I have a number of different bezels here. I actually included these also in the email today. They are $1 to $2 for a package of them, 6, a whole bracelet, 2 rings. So they're really inexpensive. You don't need to use preset jewelry. I've seen bottle caps, all kinds of things. So look around, find objects. And this is really a great project to do with kids too, because they have fun with it. The resin is non-toxic, so you don't need to worry. You can wear gloves with it. It doesn't have a smell. I know people have asked about that. And you don't need to go in and to fumigate or anything like that. It's really, really gentle and mild when you're working on it. If you get it on your nails, it will stay on your nails for a little bit, just like gel at the nail salon. So when I'm creating, I'm looking at all different options for paper. Like I said, at the retreat, we did the playbills. Here I have just really pretty fruit. This is a magazine that came in the mail. Actually, I have an example of a magazine. When we did our magazines, this was one of the magazines that the producer and printer of the magazine did. And I thought this just has amazing colors and amazing textures in the photos. So what I did was, in this one here, cut out a little piece of berries that's going to go underneath some of my beads. Now, how to cut the pictures and how to work with them. It's a good idea if you have some wax paper here. That'll be a great template. It's thin, you can work with it, and you can also put your resin on top of it so that way it doesn't dry to the surface that you're working on, especially like a bead on it board. So the first thing I'm going to do is create basically a template with this by tracing the interior of my bezel or my setting. It's easier usually with like a big ring because it's here. You're just going to use it and basically, look, if I use that bead reamer, I'm creating my own template and it's punching it out, and then I can use that to trace the design. I can take this here, and somebody at the retreat, I think, was drawing little pictures, and I have that as an example for another one drying right now. You can take it if you want to. Also, your bezel, here's another idea. Grab a pen, trace the exterior of the bezel, and once you have the exterior of the bezel traced, then you get something that you're going to cut inside the lines. Now, I've already cheated, and I've taken the wax paper, and I've gone in, and I've created that bezel. See how you can hear it? And if you've gotten our pearl mixes, you get one of these beading awls in it. It's kind of perfect that it's creating this little wax paper. And then if you're doing repetitive pieces where you have this wax paper and you're creating the designs and you want it to be a stencil, cut it out in a cardstock or even a piece of cardboard. And that way it'll last through several of those as well too. Clippings of a baby's first haircut. That's a super cute idea as well too. Yeah, and Deborah said she's used magnets. Lots and lots. I mean, it really is quite endless. So I like the wax paper with the awl because it's really easy to get that outline. And then you can take it and you can use that even if you want to, rather than taking it off and just kind of mark here. If you have a light table, you can also use the light table to do so, to create that. And they also do make punches for this size as well too. So would you use the wax paper or silicone mat under if you had a frame with no backing? You're going to need some silicone for that because you want it to raise off of the actual piece itself. So they make silicone mats really inexpensively now. You can go to the dollar store even and get silicone mats, and that's perfect if you have those to put underneath your light so it doesn't stick to as well. You can even take the Mod Podge if you want to and glue a frame to the silicone, then pour the resin in and then lift it off and put it off. Because this is water-based, it will then rinse off with your resin. Your resin is not water-based and it will be fine with water and sweat and everything. I still don't like to get it crazy wet, but just some ideas there. All right, so once you have your pieces of paper or your designs or what you're making, if you have something that has multiple pieces to it, so say you're doing this bracelet setting here, I would recommend taking the bracelet apart while you're working with it. One, that way, if you are moving it, your designs and your resin don't merge from one to the other. You don't pour it onto the sides. But here's an example of a little head here. If you don't take off the pieces that are around the resin, they can become stuck to the resin, and that's never coming apart when it dries. So the first thing I'm going to do is take my Mod Podge. I put it into a little container after I cut my paper, and you can see here, this is actually a pattern of patchwork that I had here, and I've painted that on one side with the Mod Podge, making sure that it holds in all the color and all of the ink, because you want to make sure that that ink is not going to escape when mixing with the resin. So do you have to press and dry your flowers first? Yes, it is a good idea definitely to dry and press. If you have a dehydrator, you can kind of speed up the process for that. Look and just do a quick one as there too. Sticky tape also can work as the base of an open one as well too. Great, thank you, Jeanette, for that as well. So once you do the front of the paper, it's always a good idea to do the back of the paper too. Now, some people will take heavy duty packaging tape and they'll kind of put it on both sides of the piece here and seal that in. When you're sealing in your paper or your photo or anything that's printed, you want to make sure that you're also getting the sides, because we're using this not to actually glue it down to anything yet, but we are using this to go in and make sure that our ink from our paper does not go in and get affected by the resin itself. And when you go in and don't do this, so this I had printed a little poem on, and I used it in the retreat to show that Look, it had a beautiful little poem on it. Does it have a beautiful little poem on it? Nope, it does not. And it does not because all of that ink ran down from the printer paper as soon as I poured the resin on. It actually was kind of slowly. It was really cool science experiment that as the resin was kind of drying and underneath the light, you could see that ink kind of soaking down to what was the lowest point in the project. So, I have not, India, made anything with the flower that I got from Erin a while ago. I do have it. I should make it. I was waiting for the 1-part resin. When Anna and I use the resin, you have a, in that live, we tried all kinds of different resins. We were product testing a bunch of different resin samples that we got before we decided which resin we wanted to use. Yeah, Chris said tweezers are very helpful too. Yeah, tweezers are very, very helpful, especially with the flowers as well too. So and here as we go. All right, I had loosened that and forgot that I actually didn't put the tie on. So once the paper dries, and you can see here, in addition to a little paintbrush, a little dish to close up my Mod Podge, I also have my pen here. I have my wax paper. Silicone is awesome and great. I also have near me a beading needle, because sometimes you get your paper stuck into the design when you're trying to fit it, make sure it looks good. I have a couple little beads that are sitting here as well. I have some head pins sitting nearby in case I want to use those to make any designs or anything with that as well too. And also nearby, I have a marker, which I can use again to make that base. I have, what else sitting near me? More resin, and of course my UV light. So right here, I have my piece of paper. Still a little tacky, but it's pretty much dry, but I'm going to show you with that front side. While that back is a little bit tacky, I'm going to put it, again, I've taken my bracelet apart. I still have those little pieces on. I'm going to push this. Yep, toothpicks are great as well too. I'm going to push this into the setting here with just the back of the paintbrush and into the design. Then I'm going to go in with my beading awl. Q-tips work great because I also have near me a little flame, a little fire starter. Here's my fire starter. Because when you get resin, heat will actually pop some bubbles if you have it. The beading awl, the beading needle, and toothpicks are really great to use. I like to use the needle, a beading needle. Save your old needles, they're perfect for this. And I'm just kind of pressing down the surface. Now remember, the bottom of my paper was still a little bit tacky. So what that's going to do is hold the paper in the bottom of the design. If I just put a paper into the design here and I don't actually glue it or put it down, what can happen is that resin, as I'm pouring it, can actually get below the picture. So you do want to take the picture and pretty much glue it into place. I even recommended, if they had time during the retreat, that you take your glue one more time and kind of go around the outer edge here in that surface, making sure that glue is in there nice and tight. You can get a hair dryer, you can get the nice good old blow it method, and dry that glue. Make sure the glue is dry before you're going in and doing your resin. Now, I'm going to let that dry a little bit before I show you how I'm going to pour the resin. And just to show you another sample here that I had painted one side. This was the little doodle that somebody had done at the retreat. Same deal here. I'm going to paint that back side of the cardboard. I've had this glue out for about an hour, so it's starting to get a little tacky, which honestly doesn't matter. I prefer that and have it be a little bit thicker and a little bit tackier. If you're doing this and you're using keepsakes, you want to make sure that you have a copy of that picture or just in case anything goes wrong. So just make sure that. So, yeah, lighter works great to pop the bubbles as well. You just skim lightly over the resin. Exactly. So I like the lighter here because I can control it a little bit better because it's further out and I risk burning myself less. With these little pieces, you really don't see it that much. While that's still tacky, I'm going to glue it down into here, press it into its base, take my glue and just tiny bit goes a long way. I'm sealing in this paper, especially because it's just a Sharpie marker. Now, I don't want an excess of glue around the edge. I just want to make sure that the paper is glued in. You can see I'm turning to the back of the paintbrush, kind of removing any excess glue there. And then that beading awl for me is a great tool. If you get and take something and put it in when you're trying to go in and get it around the edges, sometimes it does get stuck. That's where that beading awl is really, really helpful. The UV lights are $20. The beading awls are like $1. They come free with your pearl kits too. They're a great thing to have around. Now, if you have a piece of paper here that you can see, here's my berries, that I overcut, and I have a little space that's in here. That is where you're going to risk that UV, when you pour it, is going to get underneath the picture. So the glue is Mod Podge. And if you don't have Mod Podge, you mix one to one Elmer's glue with water. And that's one of those two as well. The resin itself too for the 50 milliliters is $20 as well. So here I have this picture, and I'm going to just go in here because I'm cheating, but I'm going to go in and put some glue down. I haven't glued this one, and you'll notice that it doesn't cover the whole thing. Now, that's okay. I can layer things, but notice how I'm putting the glue all the way around, because when it doesn't fit exactly, that is when you risk, again, that resin getting underneath the picture. And then the picture can kind of pop up as well when you're working on it. So you want to glue it down into the bezel. And the Elmer's glue is perfect. The Mod Podge is perfect for that. And then once it's glued down into the bezel, you can start pouring your resin. Now, again, we are just talking paper resin, talking a little bit on the side there. Fill in your questions, ask for sure. That's really, really helpful. We can also put things in resin. So here's one of the infinite clasps here, and I have a bunch of pearls that are sitting in here. Nothing below it. If I wanted to, I could do that. I have a ring base, and the ring base here, just to give you guys an example, I have a piece of right angle weave that I was working on that I can glue into that. Something to become aware of is that you don't need to pour all of your resin at once. Resin can be layered. So when you go in and you pour the resin, it's better to under pour than over pour. You can also watch great TikToks and YouTube videos of that layering of resin. When it comes to bigger projects, you can notice it a lot more, but you can even start to notice it on things like the necklace here that I had on. So this one here, I did it in about 3 layers to get a 3-dimensional look that these flowers were sitting in front of the other flowers when I'm working on them. So you can kind of see in there that it has a little bit of that 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional rather look of getting a variation in the depth of field when you're working on it. So always better to under pour your resin than over pour your resin. Now I have my resin light just sitting here and getting ready to go, but I'm going to do all of my steps at the same time. I like to do that and then go in and pour my resin. You can, if you want to, this one's dry, go in and pour the resin, let it sit a little bit while you're working on another one. There's no right answer for that. If you under pour your resin, you just pour more. When you have resin and you're getting ready to pour, and I'll pour the resin in a second because I don't want to keep you guys forever. When you pour the resin, you want to pour it slowly. Like I said here, I would take off these little pieces. So I also have my pliers set nice and handy. I'll open up that ring, take that off because I don't want by accident, like Annabella's man did here, I don't want that jump ring or that figure 8 to get accidentally cured into the resin because it will. Notice how this one here has that ring that got bent back in. That's the connector. I'm not getting that out. That resin is there. If you under pour the resin also and you make a mistake, you can kind of dig it out with your beading awl. Can you over dry the resin? You can, but on a small scale like this, when you're working with jewelry, it's very rare. It's better to over dry it than under dry it. When you under dry the resin and you put your finger in it, you get a fingerprint, and it's really hard to get that fingerprint out once that resin is dry. So this one here, it's hard to see from far away, but up close, it has a little fingerprint in it. the resin itself will create a tiny bit of a dome. The more you pour onto it, that bigger that dome is. So this one here is a great example of a nice dome where it sits just slightly over top of the dome as well. So this was the one that I did during the retreat, just as a little sample. And it was, I think, a rug on a picture. So it was a rug on an advertisement. All right. So once my resin is, or my paper is dry in the resin, this one here with the berries, because it is cut a little bit short, and I wanted to show that gluing so that way it didn't get below, I can put some beads into it. If I want the beads to sit up while the glue is a little bit tacky, I will put the beads sitting so that they dry in there with that glue facing up. Otherwise, it's very unpredictable once you start to pour which way the holes of the beads will sit. Because it's a liquid, basically it's a gel that you're pouring, and you'll be able to see the holes facing straight up, the ones on the way down as well too. So if you want to have something, I think it was Jan maybe that said about seashells, sea glass, memorabilia, baby's hair, dried flowers, you'll want to glue those in place. If you have a deeper piece of resin, or I'm sorry, a deeper bezel, you can also layer them. So you don't need to put everything in at once. With this here, this is already drying, so we'll just kind of put the beads in. But if you do want them to stay exactly where they are, you need to figure out how you're staying. I like to think of my beads as ice cubes in my resin projects, that if I want my ice cubes to stay where they are, how am I going to do that when I start to flow and put in my water? So one, you're not going to use ice cubes then. But that's an example that as soon as you put water in, the ice cubes are going to go wherever they want. So you could lightly sand the fingerprint with ultrafine sandpaper and then do another one on top of it. For something this tiny, it doesn't really matter. So my glue is not completely tacky as I'm going around here and putting the beads in. And my plan with this actually was to throw a bunch of these little delica beads in here to kind of look like the center of my raspberry there. So this one here is all done. It's ready to go. I'm going to get ready to pour it in my resin. It's dry to the touch on all the sides. This one's a little tacky still, so I'll wait to do that. You do want the glue to be dried as you're working with it. If you have something like a ring that you want to make, you need to think about the fact that you need a way for it to dry. So I have this here, and then I would take tin foil to make it a little bit bigger. You need a surface that when you put it down, that is going to sit straight. If it sits off to the side, the resin's going to run. If it's sitting right nice and tight like that, and you put it underneath, it's going to dry like that. So if you have something that does not have a great surface, you can do a little molding clay, a little Play-Doh in there is fine too to hold it. But I find just balling up some tin foil and making it to the exact spot that you need is really easy as well too. So I had the needle case here just to show you as an example, something that you can wrap and that you can put a couple things in here, basically wedging things in between to make sure, hey, that's going to sit up right now. All right, so pouring our resin. To pour our resin, we're going to go a little bit bigger just to show you kind of how I'm preparing and getting ready for that. And then once we pour the resin, we'll pull our camera in closer. Now, somebody had said about a silicone mat. Oh, my silicone mat went missing. All right, so I have my wax paper here, which will work just fine. You can also use, at the retreat we used, which worked perfectly, actually, taking a Potomac Beads tin, flipped it over. We had everybody write their names in the top of the tin. And then when I'm pouring my resin here, I'm pouring my resin into the tin, and I have plenty of space because of the sides of the tin to make sure that that works. Then I'm going to take it after I pour, and we're going to simply slide it under. You can see that it's motion censored, and you can pick for constantly on, constantly off. This UV light here has a 24 watt and a 48. I'm going with a 48 watt. So I press that little 48, and you can do 5 seconds, 30 seconds, 60 seconds, or just that constant on. I like to do it 60 seconds. That'll light up this light. And then I know how many minutes it's in. So you kind of have to count 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. So we're going to take that off. I'm going to turn that off so we don't get that blue. And we're going to pull in. I'm going to show you how to pour that resin. Da-da-da. Okay. A baking sheet works really well too. If you're doing a big design, you want to keep in mind like this can actually heat up from the bottom, but really not that much. Yeah, a ring holder from a jewelry box could work. Also, if you have a ring sizer, that works perfectly. Okay. First thing I'm going to do with my resin is cut it open. So when you get the resin, it has a nice long funnel top. You're going to cut it down, and I usually want about a 2 millimeter opening in the top of my resin. We've gotten small here, but let's pull back. You want about a 2 millimeter opening in the top of your resin, and you are going to cut that open yourself. You're also going to open up the bottle here, and you can see we have the seal that has been broken. So that first is the first thing that you do. You take it as well. I did the tip of the resin first, then I opened it, and then I stuck the tip on. So I didn't cut it while it was open when we were doing this. If you have anything around the exterior of it, any dots or anything like that, I'm just going to clean it off. Baby wipes work really well for this. We had them kind of all over the tables. Thought I brought some up, but all right, the first pour of the resin that I want to do is not going to be on the resin at all, or on the pieces at all. So the first pour of the resin that I want to do, you'll notice when I'm holding my hand, I'm going to go big and small and big and small. When I'm holding my resin, I'm not right away holding it like a upside down salad dressing bottle, like a squeezy bottle. I'm holding this kind of like a ketchup bottle. If you know how to do that Heinz 57 where you're tapping on the side, you're not going to hold it straight up and down. You want to hold it at an angle. We want to reduce the amount of air that gets mixed with the resin as we're pouring it, which is going to create bubbles. You don't want to go in and shake up your resin. So this resin here, I made sure that it was sitting for a while. This one, shaking up in a car, in shipping software, you're not going to do that. Also, just to mention right now, if you add resin to your shopping cart at PotomacBeads.com, you get free shipping. So automatically for domestic orders. All right. How many minutes per layer? Depends on basically the environment. A very thin layer is going to require less dry time. You can see that I'm very slowly kind of turning my angle right here. And I'm about a 45-degree angle, and see that first little drops coming out. It's hard to see. I'm going to take that on paper and just make sure, see that long line that I'm doing there? I don't want to waste a ton, but I want to make sure that there's no drops in it. When I'm going in here, I'm not touching my bezel. I'm letting the drops go into my piece by themselves. I have 3 drops there, 4 drops there, 5 drops there. I'm going to move to my next one. 1 drop, 2 drops, 3 drops. And you can see that I'm kind of down here watching those drops as they go in. And I'm kind of moving it around, but I would rather have that under pour than over pour. This bezel is a little bit bigger than those smaller 10 millimeter earring ones. And if I let it go, so I'm not going to I don't have enough in there. It's hard to see. Let me see if I can get a little bit more focused here. So around the edge, there's no resin right now. You can kind of see a little bit of a bulge. Let's see here. A little bit of a bulge there with the resin. See that kind of, I know it's hard to see. This is always the challenge with certain things like this. You can see the resin is starting to fill the area, but there's a big open space. I know right away, hey, it needs more resin. However, this one here, I'm like, does it need more resin? Hold on. I'm letting it time. I'm letting it go slowly between the layers. This one here looks absolutely fine. I'm going to put it under, and if it doesn't have the doming effect that I want it to, I can add more after, no problem. So right away, I'm going to go into this one here. And I'm going to do that same thing, turning it over slowly. See that little air bubble popped? Oh, there's an air bubble in it. See, it popped. I was lucky. If it doesn't pop, that's when you're going to go in and use the heat, where the first thing you're going to do is use the needle. And I'm looking here, I'm getting down low that you can see my eyes are kind of level with it. And I'm looking around, and I'm going to let it just sit for a brief period of time. I'm not putting it right under my light because that resin will settle. I want the resin to sit as even as possible when I'm working with it. And I already have resin on my hand, so I need a baby wipe here. When I'm not working with the resin, I'm making sure that I'm putting the lid back on, because even though it is light, air is still going to affect it. You want to make sure that it is closed. Also, because it's UV resin, it's in a dark bottle. Ding, ding, ding. It's in a dark bottle because you don't want any light into that because it actually can harden over time in the bottle with UV. Once I have it sitting, and I usually like it sitting for about, I don't know, 2-3 minutes, making sure everything evens out. Then I'm going to go in and I'm going to start the process of putting it under that UV light. The tray was great because I was able to slide it right under, and I'm going to hit that 60-second button. The UV light right now, you're going to see is a little bit of that blue light is activating the chemicals within the resin to harden. So it's basically taking out that moisture and it's hardening it because of that UV light. When it gets hardened, you're going to be left with something that's hard. So it goes from a gel to that, and this is always hard with the light on the bottom here. You go from a gel to basically a solid during that UV curing process. If I want to, this one here I did 2 weeks ago at the retreat, I can still pour more resin on top of it. There's no rule that says I must be done because it's old. It's like wire working. It's like beading that you can constantly, if you want to, add more layers. You can add more design. You can go in and change it up. If you have a mishap, every once in a while, you can heat it up a tiny bit and then dig it out. So see how, see how I have that flame there that I'm kind of taking to the resin? I'm trying to heat it up a little bit to try to get out, and it doesn't work well once it's already dried. I'm trying to go in and kind of make it a little bit that I can heat it up and dig it out of its setting here if you messed up. I will say, my beading will go, it's hard. Once you mess up, okay, there my light turned off. I'm going to do another 60 seconds, and then we're going to go in and we're going to see how many layers. When you have something that you don't like, see how I'm really should be doing this with gloves on so I don't poke myself. I can get into that resin layer and I can try to, I use this as an example already, you can see right there. I can try to pop that resin off. However, it is really hard to do unless you can get underneath that paper layer, which I think I just did. There you go. You can sometimes salvage your bezels without having very much of an impact. So there you go. And see how underneath here, actually, it's still a little goopy. That tells me actually that the resin never fully dried, which this was in a bag since the retreat. So this resin actually never fully dried. So even though the top seems completely dry, the base layer did not. How does this resin differ from the other brands Michael sells? I don't actually even know which brands Michael sells. I don't know if they sell a 1-part resin, but this 1-part resin, the biggest thing, onto a 3rd minute, is that it is going to be that no yellowing. Sometimes you can get a weird yellowy cast to resin, and then it has that crystal clear, and because it is the UV light and because it fast cures, it creates that beautiful little cabochon kind of rays on it. See how it sits up from the bezel itself. So I'm going to take out, this is not going to be fully dry, but I'm going to take this out and I'm going to just check for any bubbles. The bubbles are very likely to be in the one with beads because it's not that flat surface. So if you've never done it before, gain confidence, do flat surfaces, then start layering and adding in extra beads. When you put resin on top of a crystal, if you are wanting to include that, it very regularly will lose its shine. So you want to kind of almost put that on top of the base as well. The yellowing is horrible after a time you spend on the pieces as well too. So can you put a ball pin at the top of the bottle to keep it from clogging and drying? You don't need to. It's not going to clog and dry at all because it is that UV cure versus a activated light cure or anything. And as long as you keep that dark cap on, you're fine. I do set it aside from my UV. It's not going to get through there anyway. I kind of set it to the opposite side of the table, but you really don't have to worry about it. All right, I'm going to put my fingerprint in one of these. Let's go with the red. So I'm going to touch it and see how it sticks to my finger. That means it's not really dried. If I want to get rid of that fingerprint because it's not really dried, I can take my flame through shooter here. I can heat it up a little bit to get rid of that fingerprint. And I'm not on the piece. I'm just kind of rubbing the flame across the top of the resin. If there's any bubbles too, the bubbles will come to the top and pop. And now I can put it back under and it can cure for longer. So I'm going to go in here from here. Yeah, pop the bubbles with a toothpick. I actually prefer my beading needle because I can be way more accurate than the toothpick. The positive with the toothpick is it's an organic material, so it'll soak up the resin. So if you have a big bubble, it kind of makes it like that. But if you go in with a beading needle, it's a really easy way to go in and pop that that one as well too. Shelf life, years. I mean, because if you're keeping it in a pretty standard temperature controlled area and it's already open, you've got years of life on the resin with it too. So try the Ranger heat gun. Oh, one of the best purchases. I don't use a heat gun for much at all. I mean, we have a heat gun down in the warehouse for bead on a board we used to close in and do some of our own packaging. All right. So any other kind of questions as we sell this too? We don't sell the flame shooters. These were purchased at the dollar store. So Mod Podge at the dollar store, flame shooters at the dollar store as well. So once I know, so we're on what, minute 4 here. Oh, I forgot to press it. So we're on minute 4, 5, 6. Again, you can't really over cure the light. If I have something like this where there's beads in it, I pour the resin, but I let that settle. When you have beads, grooves, indentations, that's where you are the most likely to get those bubbles and spots. And if I have a bubble and if I have a little piece in it, so say I have this one right here, and I can see there was a bubble in this one that didn't get popped. It's right there. It's really hard to see. You're not going to be able to see it on this camera. Anyway, you'd have to be really up close to it. What you're going to do is go right on top of the bubble and try to pop it. If you can't pop the bubble, pull it with your needle to the side of the bezel or the side of the frame. That will bring the bubble over to the side and it'll pop once it hits the metal from the side. So that's going to be the easiest ones. Can it be used on gem chips in a bezel? Absolutely. You can totally use this with organic material. One thing to keep in mind with organic material is when you're working with something that say is wood, is a flower, is a seashell, those are going to be porous and they're going to soak up, just like they would soak up the glue, they're going to soak up the resin as well. So if I'm putting leather in here or a cord in here, because I can do that as well too, I still like to go in with my Mod Podge first and paint those items. So any watered down glue will work. Yeah, this is the Mod Podge. You can go in and instead of Mod Podge, mix Elmer's glue with a little bit of water. Glue your pieces. So just like we glued the paper, glue your seashells. Just like we glued the paper to the base, you can also glue them down as well. The water-based glues will then hold the shut for that porous thing and it won't soak up as much of the resin. The resin can be soaked up by those porous organic things and then it can create little dips in your resin where you go and you pour more through and you have that as well too. All right, so bringing this out, I'm going to go back in and pick up my pieces now and kind of look at them. The first thing I do is pick them up. I know that it's at least I've had about 5 minutes. I'm going to pick them up and I'm just going to kind of look at it and notice and see if the piece itself has any little indentations that needs a little bit more of a resin pour. Did it hit all of the sides of my bezel that I'm working with? Do I need to pour more? Same thing with all of these here. Say, okay, should I pour more of that resin in? And this one has a deep dish. It has a deep bezel, so I'm going to pour more into that one. This one here that I stuck my fingerprint in, I'm going to look and say, okay, did it come out? Pretty much. If you notice that one of them does not have as much resin as it needs, I'm going back into my resin, doing that same thing again. Like I'm holding the resin already, I'm holding it down to the side, making sure I'm just letting it naturally run out of the bottle. I'm not squeezing the bottle, just naturally letting it run out. I'm going to go right on top of that resin, right into the middle. So that way it flows from the middle towards the outside. There's a second drop. on the third drop. I'm going to let that sit now. So I have 3 drops in there that I've added to get a little bit more of the doming effect. I don't need it, but because I'm putting this one back in, I might as well. I'm going to drop 1 in the middle there, 1 here. Now it can go over the sides of the piece, so I don't want it to flow over the sides. Again, lid on right away, off to the side. And I'm going to let this sit for a little bit. Sometimes you'll even just do kind of that simple little shake here to try to get the resin to spread out over the piece. If you don't do that and don't give it time, it's going to get a little bubble on it when you're looking at too. So that's one thing that leaving that time a little bit for it to sit. One thing that I love about the resin as well is it almost magnifies the piece and brings all of those designs to life. So when you're looking at it, you get these 3-dimensional textures that you're looking at and have. I'm just taking my piece right now, tilting it just the tiniest little bit in my tray, and then I'm going to put it back under and dry that second layer. So the Amazonite chips, yeah, they look beautiful. Chips look great in resin because, especially if they don't have holes in them. And with the necklace here, wherever I set it down, oh, here it is. When you have that multi-layers here, if you have something that is bigger, you can kind of see that little curve right there. When you look at it, you do get a depth and a dimension to it. Again, when adding beads, the bigger the piece, the more likely it is that you're going to get bubbles or that you're going to notice. And you are going to kind of pull them off to the side with your reamer, with your needle, pulling them off to the side of the bezel, and that'll clear them up. This does not have a smell. I have some on my hands. Can't smell it. Whenever I see the UV light, I assume I'm like, oh, it's going to smell like the nail salon. It doesn't. It's very, very minimal when it comes to smell or anything like that. Can you flip the item after it dries and put it under the light to make sure the bottom is dry? You could do that, but what happens is if you're not sure that the item is dry, you want to make sure that it's completely dry, because otherwise it can put pressure on the top of that. You could build a little base of needles where it sits kind of on top, but if you flip it over and it's not completely dry, it can put pressure down on that dome, and the dome is going to get flat at the top. When it's tiny pieces like this, nobody notices. If you have little imperfections, it's kind of nice to start with just these little 10mm bails or the 12mm bracelet bails, because nobody notices and they're good practice. Like I said, they're like $1, less than $1. I think this one's like $1.25 for 6 of them. This one's like $2 for the whole bracelet. You can take it apart, make it earrings, and it's really easy and simple, so you don't have to take it. It will not yellow over time. So this is a fast UV cured light, no yellowing, crystal clear, no mixing or measuring. So that's kind of the positive of it. Like I said, we opened about, I don't even know that we would have used a full, we probably used approximately 100 milliliters for 45 people. So this is getting you, this $20 is getting you a ton of resin. You saw I did literally 3 drops. And it is not completely full in this bottle. So when you get it, you're going to be like, oh, that's weird. It's 50 milliliters, but it's in a 100 and something milliliter bottle. So just keep that in mind when you get it. It has that extra space for expansion because it has the gases and everything with it. And if it would by accident cure somehow, it has that room to expand. But this is a black bottle that is completely closed off from the light as well. So, okay. Will heat in the car melt it? Heat in the car should not melt it at all. What's going to happen is that it cures and it's hardening. So over time, it actually hardens kind of more because it naturally will pick up UV light, but you won't notice much at all after the curing process. So once you have the curing process, you will not notice much of all that extra curing. So you guys can already see the extra little bump and kind of rise that this has in it. I'm going to keep it under the light for a little bit longer here. I hit that 60 seconds again, making sure when I do it here, you can see kind of a lower light and a higher light. I like the higher 48 watt. There's 24 watt as well too. And if I wanted to put a layer and have a deeper bezel and kind of create that layering, you can do so. Thin layer for 4 minutes, then your next layer for another 4 minutes, then your next layer for another 4 minutes. Again, better to layer it than it is to over pour and have it pour out. I had an example here somewhere of it pouring out. I know this guy not only got connected to the edge, but one of these kind of poured out the side. Which one it was. Maybe it's not right on here. But any other questions? If you have a rock tumbler, it might have some fun things. Oh yeah, small pieces. You can even create things with clay. You can create things with resin. You can create and use little found objects. So many options when it comes to things to do. So here is those little ones in here. I'm going to give them a tiny bit more time. And then when it comes to designing with it, you can really do anything. I use the knotting cord, the B-Tech knotting cord here, and created a chain to use with it. When I did the bracelet, I kept the bracelet together and then just used head pins and some beads to make it a little bit more creative looking and a little bit more of that cha-cha style as well too. So, all right. Is triple thick similar as to this resin? I've never used the triple thick. I'm not sure. So the ones that I've used are 2 parts, putting them together. So yeah, clay slices would be good. The other thing to mention is that you don't need to use the bezels. We have, I should have brought them up. I apologize. They're down with photography. In the picture of the light on our website, it actually shows it used with the wood forms and using the paint markers on top of the wood forms. And then it creates a nice bubble and a nice layer over it. So yeah. So if you want to get and then I can go in once it's dry here and I have that extra little layer dry, I can go in here and hang down some pieces, create it and add it to an ear wire, hang down beads that are on it. You can see that little kind of bump and bubble that's on it there now. And whenever I think it's dry, I usually put it in for another minute or 2. I would rather have it over cure. Generally speaking, I don't put it in for less than 6 minutes. So 6 minutes for a base layer is really going to be the lowest that I put it in for. Most of these will take about 10 minutes total to cure. So it's still really fast. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this live stream. Thank you guys so much for joining in on a Saturday. I'll try to do some more of these now that summer's here and soccer season is over. I came right from a soccer game and kid activities. So it's fun to always be live to be able to answer those questions. Again, if you do need any resin, you can go back to PotomacBeads.com, search resin, or it's on the homepage right now. It's $20 for the Bead-Tech resin and then $20 for the light. It's the same if you already have a light for nails. You can use that as well too. They're both UV lights. And you get free shipping right now. So thank you guys so much for joining in. I hope that your ideas are flowing as much as mine. I can't wait to walk the shore and to pick up lots of little found objects, glue them with the Mod Podge, and encapsulate them in resin. And I think the kids will have a really fun time with it this summer as well too. So thank you guys so much for joining in. Head on over to PotomacBeads.com. Check out your resin. It's really fun and really creative based. I'm going to cut up some fabric too for some kids' clothes from when they were little and make them some things. Christmas ornaments are great as well too. So Pringles cans, the lid of the Pringle can is great if you want to do a big resin pour too. So thanks guys. Have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your weekend. Bye everyone.